Welcome to The Explainer. You know, there's a lot of talk about educational theory, but today we're getting practical. We're going to break down a real 21st century lesson plan template and see exactly how it's designed to prepare students for the world we live in now. So let's start with a big question that pretty much every educator is thinking about. It's not just about teaching history or math anymore, is it? It's about getting students ready for a future that is, well, constantly changing. So how do you actually build a lesson plan that does that? How do we rise to that challenge?
All right, here's our game plan for today. First, we'll get into what competency-based learning actually is. Then, we'll talk about setting clear goals, focusing on the whole student, designing the actual lesson, and finally, figuring out how to measure it all and make it even better.
Okay, so before we dive into the nuts and bolts of the template, we really need to get our heads around the big idea behind it. What's the why? What's the philosophy that makes this whole thing tick? So here it is. At its core, competency-based learning is a massive shift. We're moving away from just asking, hey, what did you memorize for the test? And instead, we're asking, what can you actually do with what you know? It's all about applying knowledge to real-life situations. And that one simple idea, that's the foundation for this entire template. And this is the template we're going to be working with. It's based on the National Education Policy, or NEP. You can think of it as our blueprint. It gives us a clear structure to make sure every single lesson we build isn't just about dumping information, but about actively building those real-world skills in our students. Okay, so we have the why. Now let's look at the how. If building competency is our goal, our North Star, then the very first step, the most important one, is setting super clear learning outcomes. And just look at where this is on the template. It's right at the top. Before you even think about an activity or a video, it forces you to answer the most important question. What will my students be able to show me they can do by the end of this? It's all about beginning with the end in mind. And these outcomes are specific. We're talking about strong action verbs here. Are students just going to recall or label something? That's the first rung. Or are we pushing them higher up the ladder to organize ideas, to create something totally new, or even to evaluate and justify a complex argument? It really makes you think about the level of challenge you're building in. All right, but a great lesson isn't just about the subject matter, right? It's about developing the whole person. And this next part of the template is all about that, connecting what happens in the classroom to essential life skills and what's going on in the wider world. So the template actually prompts you to think, okay, where in my lesson are students going to practice communication, or collaboration, or critical thinking? These aren't just buzzwords. These skills are every bit as important as the facts and figures we're teaching. And this is where things get really cool. The template actually suggests connecting your lesson to one of the UN's Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. So suddenly, a science lesson isn't just about biology, it's about climate action. A literature class isn't just about a book, it's about quality education. It shows students that what they're learning in your classroom has a real purpose out there in the world. And you know, we all have different kinds of learners in our classrooms. This template reminds us of that by bringing in Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences. It's a little nudge to ask ourselves, okay, I've got something for my logical thinkers, but what about my kinesthetic kids who need to move, or my musical learners? It's all about making sure the lesson hits home for everyone. Okay, so we've figured out what we want students to be able to do, and we've thought about who our students are. Now comes the fun part, designing the how. This is where we plan the actual minute-by-minute experience of the lesson. Now, the template uses the word pedagogy, which can sound a little academic, but all it really means is your method, your teaching style. Are you going to do a hands-on project-based lesson, or maybe more direct instruction? Just naming your approach helps you be more intentional about how you teach. Then you get to the flow of the chapter. And this isn't just a boring list of topics. Think of it more like the script for your lesson. It's where you plan out the whole story. How are you going to grab their attention right at the beginning? What questions will you ask to get them thinking? And what activities, videos, discussions, you name it, will make the learning actually stick? All right, so you've planned this amazing lesson, you've delivered it, but now what? How do you know if they actually learned anything? And just as importantly, how can you take their learning to the next level? That's what this final section is all about, assessment and enrichment. And you'll notice it's not just about one big test at the end. The template encourages a mix. On one hand, you have your quick formative checks, like a class test or some multiple choice questions, just to see who's following along. But on the other hand, you have the bigger project-based stuff, like a case study or a research project. That's where you really see if they can apply what they've learned. But wait, there's more. The learning doesn't have to end there. This is where subject enrichment comes in. This is your chance to get creative. How can you link this lesson to art or a hands-on activity? Maybe bring in some tech or a local context. These are the connections that make learning really memorable.
And finally, the template points to a really powerful idea, flipped learning. The concept is simple. You send the lecture part of the lesson, maybe a video or a reading, home with the students. What does that do? It frees up your precious class time for the good stuff, discussions, projects, and actual hands-on work. It completely changes the energy of the room. So, looking at this whole thing, it might feel like a lot. But the goal isn't to perfectly implement every single piece tomorrow. The real question is this. What's one small thing you can try in your very next lesson? Maybe it's just adding one clear learning outcome, or trying to connect your topic to one global goal. Because it's those small, intentional changes that really start to build a classroom for the future.